My name is Claire. I'm 30 years old. And 3 weeks after I bought my very first home, I got sued by my own parents. That's not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. I received a real court summons delivered in a manila envelope by a carrier who didn't even make eye contact. The plaintiffs, Karen and Douglas, the people who raised me, packed my school lunches and taught me how to ride a bike. And now apparently believed I owed them nearly $100,000. Their claim that I had violated a verbal family financial agreement by using the money I'd saved for 10 long years to buy a house without their permission and without contributing to the so-called family fund. When I opened the envelope, I sat frozen on the floor of my nearly empty living room surrounded by a couple of moving boxes, a folding chair, and a single secondhand lamp. My name was listed under defendant, the very same name they gave me. I don't remember how long I stared at the papers. My vision blurred halfway through the second paragraph. There were legal phrases I didn't understand, numbers I couldn't quite believe. My hands trembled as I turned each page, hoping maybe it was some cruel mistake. Maybe a prank. Maybe I had misread it all. But I hadn't. They were suing me. Over a house. A house I had bought with my own savings earned through a decade of sacrifice. A house that I hadn't even had time to fully move into yet. No furniture, no curtains, no welcome mat. Just me and a quiet echo of disbelief. I wish I could tell you this was the first time my parents made me feel like independence was a betrayal. But it wasn't. This lawsuit. It was just the loudest way they had ever tried to remind me you don't belong to yourself, you belong to us. And now they were taking that belief into a courtroom. If you're still reading, you might be wondering what kind of parents sue their own daughter for buying a house. What kind of family sees success as theft? That's what I wondered too. I wish I had an easy answer. I wish I could say they were terrible people or that they hated me. But it's more complicated than that. They weren't monsters. They were just the kind of people who thought love meant ownership. That raising a child gave them a lifelong claim over her choices, her money, and even her future. But before I can explain what happened in that courtroom, before I can tell you how I won or what it cost me, I need to tell you what came before. Because this story doesn't start with a house. It starts with a little girl who learned very young that nothing in her life would ever truly belong to her, not her allowance, not her time, not even her thoughts. The lawsuit was just the final page of a story that began decades earlier in a house where control was passed off as care and obedience was mistaken for love. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the house I grew up in, to the rules I never agreed to, and to the price I eventually had to pay for breaking them. I grew up in a small town in Indiana, in a house that looked picture perfect from the outside. It had a white porch swing, hydrangeas in the front yard, and a wooden plaque near the mailbox that read, "Family is everything." Everyone in the neighborhood knew my parents. They were the reliable kind, always at church, always helping with the school fundraiser, always smiling in public. Inside the house, though, it was different. My parents didn't yell, they didn't hit, but they didn't have to. Everything was controlled tightly, quietly, and without exception. It started small the way these things usually do. When I was 7, my mom handed me a little notebook and told me it was my spending log. I was allowed to keep $3 a week from my school lunch change, but every cent had to be written down, explained, and approved. When I spent $2 on a glittery pencil from the school fair, she made me write an apology entry in the log. She said it wasn't about the pencil, it was about discipline, about learning responsibility, about making the right choices. At the time, it felt normal. I thought all kids had weekly budget reviews on Sunday nights while their friends were watching cartoons. I thought every mom examined their child's receipts like a detective searching for clues. But it didn't stop with pocket money. By middle school, I was required to sign over all birthday cash and holiday gifts. If Grandma sent $20 in a card, it went into the family fund. I didn't know what the fund was. I just knew I wasn't allowed to use it. My mom said it was for emergencies or for when we needed something important, but somehow none of it ever came back to me. I remember once in 8th grade, I asked if I could use some of that money to go on a class field trip to Chicago. It was a big deal the first time I might get to leave the state. I'd been selected for a special math competition, and I was so proud. My mother said no. The money wasn't meant for indulgence. I was told to stay home and be grateful we had a roof over our heads. When I cried, she said, "Real life doesn't care about your feelings, Claire. You'll thank me one day." I didn't thank her. Not then, not now. In high school, things escalated. I got a part-time job at a grocery store after classes, mostly to feel like I had something of my own. The hours were long, the pay was low, but I loved that job. I loved ringing up strangers, chatting about their dinner plans, feeling useful. But when I brought home my first paycheck, my father handed me a deposit slip. It was already filled out with the account number for the family fund. "I earned this," I said, quietly, confused. "And this family raised you," he said without missing a beat. "We're all in this together. I didn't get to keep a single dollar. My younger brother Jacob never had to do any of this. He didn't work. He didn't keep logs. He wasn't asked to give up his birthday money. Whenever I asked why the rules were different, I was told, 'He's still young. Boys mature slower. You're the older sibling, we expect more from you.' By 16, I had stopped asking questions. Resistance didn't get me anywhere, it just got me guilt. I learned to smile, nod, and hand over everything I earned. I learned to stop wanting things. Wanting made me weak. Wanting made me selfish. But inside something was growing, not resentment, not yet. Just a quiet longing for space, for silence, for the right to make my own mistakes. That longing turned into resolve the day I found out my mom had opened one of my college acceptance letters. It was a big envelope thick with financial aid forms and scholarship offers. I had applied to a university out of state one with a strong engineering program and a full tuition offer. I hadn't told my parents yet because I knew what they'd say, but I didn't get the chance. My mom opened the letter without asking. She read it, folded it, and left it on the kitchen counter like it was junk mail. When I asked her about it, she didn't apologize. She said college is expensive. You don't need to go chasing dreams across the country. You can live at home, take some community college classes, help us with bills. I told her I didn't want that. I told her I wanted to leave to go somewhere new to learn on my own. Her face went cold. "If you walk away from this family," she said, "you walk away from everything we've given you. Don't expect us to catch you when you fall." I stood there holding the letter, my hands shaking. That night, I cried alone in my room. But by morning, I had made a decision. I would leave. I would go to that university even if it meant going alone, even if it meant struggling, even if it meant never coming back. I started working extra shifts. I asked a friend if I could use her address to open a separate bank account when my parents couldn't access. I stopped talking about college at home. I became quieter, more careful. I planned every step in silence. And when the time came, I packed my bags without a goodbye, just a note on the fridge. "Thank you for everything. I need to try this on my own." I took the train that afternoon, a suitcase in each hand and a future I was determined to earn, even if it meant losing everything behind me. The train ride out of my hometown was quiet. I remember watching the rows of cornfields pass by, thinking how strange it was that the world could look so peaceful when my whole life felt like it had just shattered. I had no money beyond the few $100s I'd managed to save, secretly, no car, no one waiting to meet me at the other end. But I had a plan, or at least I had determination, and that had to be enough. The university I attended was 3 states away. It was a large public school with a strong engineering program and a dorm that reeked of mold and instant noodles. I had received a partial scholarship, and combined with federal aid and a small grant from a Women in STEM foundation, it was barely enough to cover tuition and housing. Barely. Everything else, food, books, clothing, I had to figure out on my own. I got a job at the campus library, shelving books and answering questions at the information desk. It paid minimum wage and came with a 15-hour-a-week cap. Not nearly enough to live on, but it was something. I also picked up shifts at a local diner 2 nights a week, waiting tables until midnight. On weekends, I cleaned apartments near campus, mostly for wealthier students whose parents paid for maid service. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving or Christmas. I didn't have the money for bus tickets, and more than that, I didn't want to face them. Not yet. I told people I was working through the holidays for time and a half pay, which was also true. I slept on a twin mattress, shared a bathroom with 3 other girls, and rotated through 2 pairs of jeans and 3 shirts. One winter, my boots had holes in the soles, so I lined them with plastic bags. I didn't complain, not out loud. Complaining felt like weakness, like an open invitation to doubt myself. And I couldn't afford that. I was surviving on caffeine, adrenaline, and stubbornness. There were days I skipped meals to afford textbooks, nights when I cried into my pillow because I was just so tired. But every time I felt like quitting, I thought about what my mother had said. Don't expect us to catch you when you fall. And I told myself then I won't fall. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in electrical engineering and $42,000 in student loans. But I also graduated with a full-time job offer and entry-level technician position at a manufacturing plant outside of Cincinnati. The pay was low, the hours long, but it came with benefits and a chance to get out of survival mode. That first year after graduation was still rough. Rent ate up half my paycheck. The other half went to loans, food, utilities, and the old Honda Civic I bought off Craigslist. I lived with 2 roommates in a leaky upstairs apartment. The wallpaper peeled in the corners. The heater made weird clicking sounds all night. We had roaches. But we also had each other. We shared food, split shampoo, and took turns scrubbing the bathroom. For the first time since leaving home, I didn't feel completely alone. Even so, I was always calculating, always cutting costs. I brought lunch to work every day, usually peanut butter sandwiches and a hard-boiled egg. I collected grocery coupons like currency. I bought all my clothes secondhand. I didn't have a TV. My only splurge was a $6 monthly internet plan that barely loaded YouTube. Every time I got a raise, I didn't celebrate. I adjusted my budget and saved the difference. I started reading personal finance blogs, learning about interest rates and savings accounts. I opened a high-yield savings account and set up automatic transfers 50% of every paycheck right off the top. Out of sight, out of temptation. Friends would invite me out, happy hours, concerts, road trips. I always had an excuse. I couldn't afford it, and I didn't want to explain why. Over time, the invitations stopped coming. I wasn't angry. I understood. They were building lives. I was building armor. By the time I was 26, I'd paid off a third of my student loans and saved $90,000. I had transferred to a better company, one that paid $60,000 a year and offered overtime. I took every extra shift I could get. My boss once joked that I must have a mortgage, 2 kids, and a gambling habit to work that hard. I just smiled. What I really had was a goal: buy a house. Not just any house. A modest one with a little yard, maybe a basement where I could set up a workbench. Nothing fancy, nothing I couldn't afford. Just a place that was mine. At 27, I moved into a cheap studio apartment near the edge of town. It was in a rough neighborhood, but it cost only $500 a month, utilities included. I had a sleeping mat, a lamp, and a folding table. I treated the apartment like a staging ground, temporary, functional, and intentionally bare. I stopped dating. I couldn't afford the emotional or financial expense. I skipped weddings and reunions. I worked holidays. I lived off rice beans and frozen vegetables. I fixed my own plumbing with YouTube tutorials. I learned how to patch drywall. I even taught myself to cut my own hair. Was it lonely? Yes. Was it hard? Absolutely. But it gave me something I hadn't had since I was a child: control. Every dollar I saved was mine. Every choice I made belonged to me. I wasn't chasing luxury. I was chasing ownership. Freedom. A future that couldn't be taken away because it wasn't borrowed from anyone. When I turned 29, I checked my account balance for the first time in months. I had saved $287,000. I stared at the number for a long time, almost afraid to believe it was real. With my credit score in the 800s and no debt beyond my student loans, I realized I could finally do it. I could buy a house. I gave myself one night to celebrate. I bought a slice of cheesecake, sat cross-legged on the apartment floor, and started making a list of neighborhoods. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post online. I didn't call old friends. It felt like holding a secret treasure in my hands. Over the next 6 months, I worked with a realtor, toured 38 properties, and finally found one, a 2-bedroom fixer-upper on a quiet street with an overgrown garden and a cracked sidewalk. It needed paint, new appliances, and a lot of elbow grease. But it had good bones. And it was mine. The asking price was $265,000. I paid cash. When I signed the papers, the notary smiled and said, "Congratulations, homeowner." I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for 10 years. I moved into the house with nothing but my folding table, my sleeping mat, and a secondhand microwave. The rooms echoed when I walked through them. The air smelled like old paint and sawdust. But it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, every square foot I stepped on belonged to me. The first week, I focused on cleaning and patching holes in the walls. I borrowed a ladder from my neighbor to clear out the gutters. I painted the front door navy blue. Every night, I fell asleep on the floor, exhausted but content. The house wasn't perfect, but it was safe. It didn't demand anything from me. It didn't shame me. It was quiet. After a few weeks, I started slowly furnishing the space. I found a small couch on Craigslist, a coffee table from a local thrift shop. I bought curtains for the first time in my life, gray linen ones that softened the morning light in my bedroom. I picked paint colors. I took my time. I had meant to keep the news to myself a little longer, but the truth was, I wanted someone to be proud of me. I wanted, maybe foolishly, to share what I'd done. Not with the world, but with the people who had once promised me that if I did things the right way, I'd be rewarded. So I wrote an email to my parents. It wasn't emotional or dramatic. Just a short message with a picture of the house, my new address, and a sentence at the end. I know things between us have been strained, but I wanted you to know I'm okay, and I'd be open to reconnecting if that's something you'd ever want. I hit send before I could overthink it. I also sent a separate message to my younger brother, Jacob. We hadn't spoken in years, but I thought maybe he'd understand. Maybe he'd see that I had tried, that I'd taken care of myself when no one else would. 3 days later, I got a reply. It wasn't from my parents. It was from Jacob. It began without a greeting. "So you finally bought a house. Must be nice. I assume you used the money you kept for yourself all these years instead of contributing like the rest of us. Mom and Dad want to talk. Sunday dinner, be there at 6. There was no congratulations, no joy, just resentment dressed up like duty. Against my better judgment, I went. I told myself maybe this was progress. Maybe they wanted to make peace. Maybe, just maybe, they'd see me as an adult now, an equal. The house was exactly as I remembered it, same beige siding, same flower beds, same worn-out doormat that said, "Bless this home." My father opened the door. He didn't smile. My mother was already at the table setting out her best dishes. Jacob and his wife sat on the couch, stiff and silent. We ate in near silence. My mother's pot roast was the same recipe she'd made since I was a child. The smell used to feel like home. That night, it just made my stomach tighten. After dessert, my father leaned back in his chair and said, "So, the house." I nodded. "It's small, but it's what I wanted." "How much did it cost?" My mother asked, her tone casual but pointed. "$265," I said. My father raised his eyebrows. And you paid cash? Yes. With what money, he asked. You don't make that much. I've been saving for 10 years, I said. I've lived below my means. I've worked multiple jobs. I don't spend unless I have to. They exchanged a look. And none of that money went to the family fund, my mother said, setting down her fork. I hesitated. No, I haven't lived at home since I was 19. I didn't think. That's the problem, she interrupted. You didn't think. You just decided that you're exempt from your responsibilities. What responsibilities? I asked, my voice rising. I supported myself. I paid every bill, every loan. I never asked you for a thing. And we never offered, my father said. Because you walked away. I looked at Jacob. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother leaned forward. Claire, we've calculated what you should have contributed over the past decade. Based on your estimated income, the percentage you would have paid into the family fund the missed years, it comes out to just under $95,000. I stared at her. You're joking. We're not, she said. We're asking you to do the right thing. Sell the house. Contribute your share. And we can put this all behind us. I pushed back from the table. I will not sell my house. It's not just your house, my father said. You built that future with resources we gave you. With discipline we taught you. You don't get to take the benefits and abandon the obligations. I earned that money, I said, my voice shaking. I lived in apartments with rats. I walked to work in the snow to save bus fare. I skipped meals so I could pay my loans. You didn't teach me that. You punished me for wanting to leave. And now you want a piece of what I built without you. If you don't make this right, my mother said coldly, we'll take it to court. I left the house without saying goodbye. 2 weeks later, a courier came to my door and handed me an envelope. I already knew what was inside. A lawsuit, filed in our county courthouse. Plaintiffs, Karen and Douglas. Defendant, me. The claim breach of verbal family contract and unjust enrichment. They were asking the court to place a lien on my property until I paid the $95,000 they said I owed them. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by paint cans and moving boxes, the lawsuit shaking in my hands. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the message. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I would always belong to them. Unless I fought back. I had never hired a lawyer before. I'd never even been inside a courtroom. But the moment I read through the lawsuit, every cold, calculated sentence of it, I knew I couldn't face this alone. After 2 days of calling law offices, I found someone who not only listened without judgment, but seemed to understand exactly what I was up against. Her name was Marisol Grant, a family law attorney in her early 40s with tired eyes and a steady voice. She charged less than most, offered a payment plan, and said something during our first call that stuck with me. This isn't about money, it's about power. And people who feel entitled to you will always find a reason to claim what you built without them. We met the next morning in her office, a cramped space above a tax services storefront with peeling linoleum floors and file boxes stacked along every wall. She reviewed the court filing, flipped through the pages of accusations, then looked up at me. Do you have documentation of your financial independence? She asked. Yes, everything. Over the next few weeks, I provided her with every pay stub I had saved, bank statements, showing my savings patterns, student loan records, lease agreements, tax returns, and letters of recommendation from old employers. I even had photos of the apartments I'd lived in, the peeling ceilings, the broken heaters, the bare-bones furniture. I gave her access to my savings tracker, a spreadsheet I had updated for 9 years straight, color-coded, every penny accounted for. Marisol helped me prepare my defense that there was no contract, no obligation, no written agreement of any kind, that I had been financially independent since the age of 19, that any so-called family fund was informal at best and never presented to me as a binding requirement. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing. I took unpaid time off work. I packed a small bag with documents, notes, and a photo of my house, not for evidence, just for strength. The courthouse was beige and cold and smelled faintly of floor wax and fear. I arrived early. My parents were already there sitting with their attorney, a sharp-suited man named David Mercer, with silver hair and a voice like radio static. My mother wore a navy dress and pearl earrings. My father wore his best suit. They didn't look at me. The judge was a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense expression. She asked for opening remarks. Mercer went first. He spoke in a calm, reasonable tone, painting a picture of devoted parents who had raised their daughter with discipline and sacrifice only to be cast aside. He referenced the family financial tradition, a verbal agreement that he claimed had governed our household since my adolescence. He said I had benefited from years of structured guidance and that my ability to save money was a direct result of values and support provided by the plaintiffs. Then it was our turn. Marisol stood steady and precise. My client is an adult who has been fully financially independent for more than a decade, she said. She has never signed any contract or agreement binding her to a family fund. The plaintiffs have not provided her with financial assistance since she left home at 19, and there is no legal basis to retroactively assign her earnings to a communal pool. The judge asked for evidence. Marisol handed over a binder months in the making with all the documentation we'd gathered. The judge flipped through the first few pages and nodded. "This is thorough," she said. Then she turned to me. "You claim to have saved nearly $300,000 while working entry-level and mid-level jobs. Can you explain how I swallowed hard, then stood?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I lived well below my means. I shared housing. I didn't own a car for years. I worked multiple jobs. I had no support, no gifts, no safety net. Every dollar I saved came from sacrifice." The judge looked me in the eye. Noted. The preliminary hearing ended with the judge declining the plaintiff's request for a lien on the house. She scheduled a full hearing for the following month. Outside the courtroom, I passed my parents without a word. My mother didn't even glance at me. My father looked straight ahead. Jacob wasn't there. Over the next 4 weeks, the emotional toll grew heavier. I had trouble sleeping. My appetite disappeared. I avoided calls, texts, even the sound of the doorbell. The house that once felt like a sanctuary started to feel like a fortress under siege. Marisol kept me grounded. She prepped me for testimony. She told me what to expect cross-examinations attempts to twist my words emotional manipulation dressed up as legal argument. "You'll be tempted to justify your independence," she said one afternoon. "Don't. You don't owe them a defense of your adulthood." The day of the full hearing, I wore a navy dress I'd bought from a consignment shop 5 years earlier. It was clean-pressed and unremarkable. I wanted to look like exactly who I was, not a victim, not a villain, just a woman who built a life from the ground up. The courtroom was more crowded this time. My parents had brought character witnesses, a few church friends, a cousin I barely knew. They took the front row. On my side sat Marisol, my old roommate Tasha, and my closest friend from work Mia, who had brought a bag of cashews and whispered, "We got you before the judge entered." The plaintiffs were called first. My father spoke about the value of shared responsibility, about how Jacob had consistently contributed 25% of his income to the family fund, about how I had taken advantage of their structure without participating in it. My mother cried on the stand. She said they had loved me too much, that they had expected better, that I had used them and then discarded them. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand with my spine straight. Marisol guided me gently. I told the truth. About growing up with strict financial control. About being required to turn over birthday money. About never being allowed to keep my paycheck. About leaving home because the only future I saw there was one where I never got to be my own person. I explained the years of saving, the cheap apartments, the instant noodles, the jobs, the silence, the loneliness. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. During cross-examination, Mercer tried to frame me as cold and calculating. He asked if I had ever told my parents I loved them since leaving. No, I said, but I also didn't ask them to love me conditionally. He presented an old birthday card I had written my mother in high school, thanking her for teaching me to be responsible. Wouldn't you say that proves you accepted their financial teachings? I said thank you, I replied. That doesn't mean I signed away my future. The moment that changed everything came near the end. My mother was called back to clarify something in her earlier statement that they had provided occasional cash support during my college years. Marisol perked up. Mrs. Walker, she said you testified earlier that Claire received no financial support from you after she left home at 19. Are you now saying you gave her money? My mother shifted in her seat. Well, small things. Emergencies. Do you have records of these transfers? No, it was cash, so no documentation. It was family, she snapped. We didn't think we needed receipts. Marisol looked at the judge. No further questions. In closing, Marisol addressed the room. This is not a case about legal contracts. It's a case about emotional control, about using the language of family to mask coercion. Claire Walker did not breach a contract. She broke free of one. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. This court finds no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim. The defendant, Claire Walker, is under no obligation to contribute retroactively to a fund she was never legally bound to. The claim is dismissed. No lien will be placed on the property. Court costs are the responsibility of the plaintiffs. The gavel came down. It was over, except it wasn't. I stood there, heart pounding, as my parents gathered their things. My mother's face was pale. My father didn't look at me. Jacob appeared at the back of the room. He looked at me, shook his head, and walked out. I didn't chase him. I didn't say goodbye. I sat back down, took a deep breath, and whispered to Marisol. Thank you. She nodded. You did this. You stood up for your future. But as I left the courtroom that day, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a funeral. The day after the verdict, I slept for almost 14 hours. My body had been holding tension for weeks, maybe years, and once the pressure lifted, it collapsed. When I woke, it was late afternoon. Light filtered through the linen curtains I'd bought with a coupon and carried home in a reusable grocery bag. For the first time in a long while, the silence in the house didn't feel like a threat. It felt like permission. I cleaned. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to reclaim the space. I put away the court documents. I folded the dress I wore to the hearing and placed it in a box I labeled, "For when I forget what I survived." The house felt different. Not because of what had changed on the outside, but because of what I had proven to myself inside it. That I could stand my ground. That I didn't owe anyone my future. That I could lose my family and still keep myself. Still, the aftermath wasn't clean. I kept waking in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced there would be another envelope on the doorstep. I checked the mailbox twice a day, just in case. I avoided grocery stores near the old neighborhood. I started skipping social events even with people who had supported me. My friend Mia noticed. One evening after dinner at her place, she waited until we were alone washing dishes before saying, "You won, Claire, but you still look like you're fighting something." "I'm just tired," I said. She handed me a dish towel. "Then maybe it's time to stop carrying it alone." That week, I looked for a therapist. I found one who worked on a sliding scale and specialized in family estrangement. Her office was cozy, filled with soft lamps and shelves of old novels. Her name was Dr. Renee. She spoke with the calm authority of someone who had seen more than her share of family fractures. Estrangement, she said during our first session, is grief without a funeral. For months, I sat on that couch and talked through the years I'd spent trying to be small enough to be loved. The years I had internalized every criticism, every withheld praise, every manipulated obligation as something I had deserved. She helped me understand something I hadn't been able to admit, that what I had long called self-discipline was in part survival, that building a life of extreme control was my way of reclaiming what had been denied to me for so long: choice, autonomy, peace. Your house, she said, wasn't just about real estate. It was your declaration of sovereignty. Around the same time, I started letting people in literally and metaphorically. I hosted small dinners, I hung pictures, I planted herbs in the windowsill. Mia helped me assemble a secondhand bookshelf, and we laughed over our mutual inability to read instruction manuals. A few months later, I joined a community group that repaired old furniture and donated it to women leaving abusive homes. I didn't talk much at first, but I showed up every week, quietly sanding down old chairs and painting end tables in bright, defiant colors. One Saturday, I got a message from Jacob. It said only, "Do you have time to talk?" We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse neutral ground. He looked old or tired. We sat across from each other with cups we didn't drink from. "I didn't know they were going to sue you," he said. "I find that hard to believe." He didn't argue. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "You always made it look easy." "Being alone." "It wasn't," I replied. He nodded. We didn't solve anything that day. But it was the first conversation we'd had that wasn't about blame or obligation. Just two adults trying to navigate the damage left behind. Later that year, he and his wife had a daughter. They named her Lily. He sent me a photo, and I sent back a message that said simply, "She's beautiful." He didn't reply, but he didn't block me either. That was enough. My parents never reached out. Through a cousin, I heard they told people I had turned my back on the family. I didn't correct them. I no longer felt responsible for managing their version of the story. Because here's what I've learned. You don't owe anyone access to the life you bled to build. Love doesn't come with ledgers. Family is not defined by who raised you, but by who respects you. And independence, true independence, isn't selfish. It's sacred. 2 years after I bought the house, I hosted a home anniversary party. Friends brought folding chairs and baked goods. Mia brought a new doormat that said, "Welcome to peace." We sat in the backyard under cheap string lights, eating, laughing, breathing easy. That night, I stood in the doorway of my home, my house, my rules, my life, and felt something I hadn't in a very long time. Not just freedom, but safety. Real, earned, uncompromised safety. And I knew whatever came next, I could face it. Because this time I was standing on ground no one else had the right to claim.